Thank you, Paula. I'm hoping you can hear that clearly enough. Look, I think everybody on this stage has every right to be extremely proud of the quality of universities in Western Australia, but we're not here to dwell on their successes today. What we're looking at today is future-proofing. And I'm minded of a report that came out only a month or so ago that said the time for tinkering and tweaking the future of universities is over, and it is now time to look at things like a step change in the way that universities progress. So I might start with a question about how you work together. You're all sitting nicely on the stage, but we might start with looking at the idea of collaboration, both with each other and also with industry. What's working well? What needs some addressing? And I might actually throw to you, Deborah, first and ask, what are the real success stories?
Oh, well, thank you very much, Ruth, and great to see so many people here today for what is always a good event and a good annual event. I mean, I think the Minister spoke about a number of particular areas that the state government has supported, and we collaboratively, and you heard her talk about Team WA, are very much in support of those. I mean, I think we all recognise, and you're talking about step changes, that one of the step changes we do need to make as universities right across the country is to work as core parts of clusters and precincts. If we are going to diversify our economy and make that transition that we know we need to make to a knowledge economy, then clusters and precincts are absolutely essential. And we are all around each of our institutions involved in trying to do that, and the state government's hubs that they've announced will certainly assist in this. But I think, you know, for what we're trying to do at Curtin is to co-locate industry much more on our campus. And I think we all recognise that the great innovative cities of the world and the clusters of the world, you can't tell where universities begin and end and where business and the corporates begin and end. And that's absolutely what we're trying to do. But I think it's worth remembering, just because you label something as an innovation precinct, for instance, as others have said, doesn't mean it's innovative. You've got to work at it, and the critical thing you have to do is to collaborate. We have to collaborate as institutions, but we have to collaborate with industry, and government's got a critical role to play as well.
Yeah, sure. I think the Team WA is a reality. It's something that people like me who have come from outside Western Australia truly appreciate. We do work very closely together as universities, and I probably won't go through all the examples that we have. But I think one of the sort of challenges we have is how do we collaborate more and better with external organisations, industry and business. And the stats show it that we are not as good at that in Australia as we could be. But the precincts, I think, will be something that will drive that forward very strongly. Murdoch University, like Curtin, is part of a precinct, and we are in the Southern Corridor in the Knowledge and Health Precinct, where we have collaborations with the hospitals across the road. But also we have aged care facility, we have correction services across the road, TAFE, we have a school on our campus. So we already have a community that we can collaborate with. I was reading a report recently by KPMG around how do you harness the superpowers of universities. And I was really interested in that report, where they clearly said that there isn't a clear understanding what is the role of universities or what value universities can add to external stakeholders. So I think we have a bit of work to do there jointly to demonstrate the value of universities, but also enable external organizations and stakeholders to find their way to universities. We are very complex organizations. You know, we have structures that most of you don't ever think about or understand. We have deans and pro-vice-chancellors. What does that mean? So one of the things we are trying to do is put very clear front doors, we call it front doors at Murdoch, so that people can find their way in and collaborate. You said short answers, I'll stop there.
Well, I'd like to know, and I'm going to turn this on to Dawn, How much is it important that a university is the centre of gravity of these precincts? Are you really anchor institutions? I think the KPMG report referred to that term as well.
So thank you, Ruth. That was the 2017 KPMG report, which referred to us as anchor institutions. And of course, there's several things if you pick that concept apart. It isn't just about the powerhouse of the economy, and we are. So recently, London Economics commissioned a piece, we commissioned them to produce a report for the Group of Eight. The Group of Eight in 2016 contributed $66 billion back to the nation. That's 8 universities. And if you think about that and add on the universities across the whole sector, from an economic point of view, there is significant input into the economy and driving jobs, growth, tourism, all the things we've heard about. But let me just say, in response to your question, I need to remind people that we're not factories. And we are powerhouses for the economy, but more importantly, we're greenhouses. We grow people, we grow things, we grow the economy, yes, but we grow innovation. And for us to think about how we can establish ourselves as a greenhouse economy at the centre of these precincts, I think is something that we need to engage industry with. And let me just say a confession here, I think, from all of us across this panel. I agree with the KPMG report that seems to suggest that we haven't really been out there in terms of communicating the benefits to society and the impact that we have in a way that we ought to be. So the real impacts, the real world impacts that we're making, we're starting to do that more. We can do it better. But actually, if we work collaboratively with industry, and we were in a meeting last night with CSIRO, then I think we have an opportunity to create a unifying vision. And if I was to say what we're not doing well at the moment across the universities, we're collaborating well across key areas, the state's priorities and the nation's priorities, but what we haven't yet got, in collaboration with industry and government and other agencies, a unifying vision of how we can actually take the state forward over the next 10, 20 and 30 years.
Yeah, I just wanted to add 2 points to that. One, to throw it back, that thought, I think it's very university-centric to think that we are or will always be the anchor institution. I think that that's a sign of how we've thought in the past. There will be things that we're the anchor institutions in, but there are certainly areas where in business, in industry, in the professions, where the anchor, the originator of something to be looked at is where it should be coming from, and they should be coming to us. But in that sense, they are the anchor. The second point is just an observation, and they'll probably all throw things at me. But we spend so much time talking about digital disruption, and even the Minister spoke about bricks and mortar and the campuses of the future, and it sounds as if we're moving into this world where people don't want to be near each other anymore. And yet, here we are talking about precincts and hubs. So I find it just a little bit interesting that on the one hand we're going down this one path where people are never going to see each other, but we're also talking about that collaboration only happens if we're actually all in the same location together. I just find it a little bit odd or inconsistent.
Look, it's a really good point, and I'd like to flick this one to Stephen. When you look at it's Stephen's fault. When you look at how Australia performs in this area of the innovation precincts, and you've obviously just had an innovation hub granted to you, who's doing it better than us? Who's our main competition in a local sense?
I'll give you a local sense and maybe a little bit broader than that. So if you went to somewhere like Macquarie Park, then you'd find, and the anchor there is a university, but you'd also find a hospital, and you'd find well over 100, probably 100 to 150 small to medium and also large companies associated with it. So I think we're doing a good job in the innovation hubs we've got, but we don't have critical mass. I think the problem with us at the moment is just a scale thing, and I think there will be a tipping point. I think there's growth. There are a lot of new things happening. The state's been very resource focused, and if you look beyond that, it's then health and retail and construction. We really need to get some critical mass in the tech, science, and of course the cyber hub is part of that, but of course the data one that you've got, Debbie, at Curtin. So I think we're going in the right direction. I'm optimistic, but you know, we're miles behind I-95 in Boston or Berlin, Aldershof, where there's a university with a media city and something like 1,000 companies around that with large companies, international companies, and also small to medium enterprises. So I'm enjoying the love-in that we're all working together. It's absolutely fantastic. Perhaps not, we compete a bit on students, but on the things like the research and getting these innovation hubs together, it really is a true collaboration.
What's the missing ingredient? Is it simply numbers? Is it geographic proximity? Is it having a major, a Google or a Tesla or somebody like that in town that's going to drive this? What are we missing?
Clearly, if you were to look in the States and you were to look at it in Boston, or you went across and you looked at the Bay Area, you can clearly see that the gravitational things there are MIT, Harvard, Tufts, Boston University, and the list goes on in Boston. If you go across to the West Coast, then of course Stanford is a major hub, and you've got Google and HP spin-offs out of that. It's all a question of scale. Go back so many years and see Stanford being a small college invested with from a guy called Stanford, and then the growth of its endowments, etc. It literally is a concentration, and we've been launching a spin-out, Sapient Cyber. And that's going okay, but if you were, and it's got good investment, but if you were doing that in the Bay Area, there'd be so many VCs, there'd be so many angels, and many of them have come from Stanford and from those spin-outs. So I think, again, going back to it, I think we're going to get there, but we haven't got that scale, and there'll be a tipping point sometime in the future when we do get it, and then it'll take off.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that, and I absolutely agree with the comments Stephen has made, and it is an issue of scale. But I think I always go back to Ian Chubb, who's former Chief Scientist of Australia, basically said universities have got a role, we've got to do some things differently, business has got a role, and business has to do some things differently, and so does government. If I just take universities, it's been mentioned already, we've got to open ourselves up to be more accessible, and some of the changes that have been made to our university acts have really helped in that regard. Have industry co-located on campus, not on the edge of campus, right in the middle of campus, where the ideas are being generated, where the research is happening, so that you get that cross-fertilisation. We need to work with industry differently. In our Innovation Central Perth, which is a collaboration with Cisco and Woodside and Data61, we have a fast, fail, succeed quickly methodology rather than the long-term projects that have tended to characterise university industry research. But business and industry need to understand the sheer capacity that is down the road from them. Australia is a small country, we're 0.3% of the world's population, we generate 4% of the world's scientific output. We punch well above our weight, and so just down the road from SMEs, from corporates, there are researchers working on things that are relevant, and business needs to understand that. They need to talk to us in their language so that we understand their timelines. So that's the role of business, and government, through policy settings, can assist. We do need to look at R&D tax incentives. We know that at the Commonwealth level, that's a big issue. I think venture capital funding in Australia is a big issue. So I see it as a responsibility. Universities have to do things differently, and I think we all understand that. But business and industry just needs to understand the sheer capacity in this country, and then government's got a role to play.
If I can just add, I think what we've been doing a lot of is the discovery end of the virtuous cycle. We haven't actually focused enormously in Australia and actually in the universities in terms of translation, application, and then commercialisation until very recently. And there's some very simple things we can do in universities in terms of incentives. At the moment, the structures and the way in which we recruit and reward our staff means that we are not incentivising this end of the pipeline. And we need to think differently about that, and we are. And you've heard already from Deborah that we're doing a lot of that in terms of the co-location and creating hybrid appointments and actually rethinking the way in which we look at the pipeline of staff we're bringing into the universities. But we also need to be able to work with government in terms of incentivising commercialisation in a way that brings industry and universities together. And other countries have done this better in the way in which they've changed the funding model, and the funding goes directly to industry, but they only get the funding if they're working collaboratively with the universities. So we have to think about that at the grand scale, but universities also have a role to play.
I might just ask a quick question on commercialisation before I flick over again. In terms of the incentive, if you're a very bright PhD and you're sitting in one of your labs, whichever lab it is, what is the incentive to turn to your master's supervisor, your PhD supervisor and say, I have an idea that I think I can commercialise? Why wouldn't you go somewhere else where those VCs are sitting down the road?
Well,
how do you keep them?
If I can just give an example, most people will know the example of the University of Waterloo in Canada, where actually when you recruit students, the conversation is not recruiting into the course. The conversation is with your immediate supervisor over the VC work that you're going to do and what it is that is going to be the end output of your programme. And so they've really turned that around, and that's continued to evolve. That's been there for decades, and they're evolving that. This is also about how we think about students and moving away. The Minister focused on this, moving away from the cram and exam, which a lot of people are very familiar with, to pick and mix, to pause and return. There's a whole series of ways in which we can encourage opportunities for postgraduate students through the industry PhD model that we've signed up to only this week with CSIRO, to really use different approaches to taking time out to then commercialise and then coming back into their studies, etc. And that's happening. And I think Steve's point about scale is important in this. Because the more of those accelerator spaces that you have and the more of those opportunities for students to do that, of course, the more it grows.
Fantastic.
Yeah, just agree, of course, with everything that has been said. But I've been thinking about recently, what is it that is the unique contribution of a university, so in a precinct? So what is it that the university brings? University brings, of course, its research expertise, for instance. It brings its students and so on. But I just focus on the research expertise. So on a precinct, you can have a living lab of something. So on our precinct, we are developing a laboratory for energy. And energy in the sense of renewable energy, using our expertise and research in that. And have it as a living lab first for that precinct, providing energy through these means. And then beyond to the local community. And then scaling up from there. So I think the scaling up is a step process, but you have to, the anchor institution as a university has to be about what it has uniquely to offer. And uniqueness is in its research capability and how it can leverage that for benefit of the local communities, but then beyond.
Well, look, I'd like to ask about this level of uniqueness, and then I might flick over to the floor for some questions. But before that, you've got 5 very different universities, but there are going to be areas where you will equally want to have a share of this pie. So how do you get the scale without standing on each other's toes, or do you? Do you compete and grow through that process?
Well, we work together to try and grow the pie that comes to WA, and that's, I think underpins all of what we do collaboratively. Yes, there's areas of competition, Stephen's referred to them, but if you look at a whole lot of metrics, international students, and people have heard me talk about this a lot, NH and MRC funding that comes through various schemes, the issue is that WA isn't getting as much as we should do, given our proportion of the population and given our strengths of our universities. So if we work together, it's about growing the pie. Growing the pie for all of our institutions, playing to our distinctive strengths in a way that we're more than the sum of the parts. And we've got many examples of how we've done that, but it's all about improving things for us collectively, more of the pie rather than just having to divvy it up between us.
Yeah, I do appreciate the fact that we work collaboratively in that area, but I guess one of the things I note is that we don't get our fair share. But if you look at New South Wales, which gets more than its fair share, it is viciously competitive. Mm-hmm. All of the universities in there are trying to, beat up on the other one. That might or might not be good, but the results show they get the money. And that's, in the end, because the grants are going to the quality and they're going to the volume and the power that New South Wales has got. Now, probably we can't emulate that, again, because of scale by beating each other up. So I don't think our only alternative, really, is if there's going to be a centre for something, I'd rather it was a centre south of the river, although I'd like it to be north, but I'd rather it was a centre south of the river in Western Australia than in Brisbane. Mm-hmm. So if I can bring something to the table that's going to help it be there, I'm going to do that. And obviously, if you could bring something to the far north in Joondalup, then of course we'd be delighted to have it.
Can I just echo what Steve just said? It might surprise you to learn that we don't always agree on everything. And I think, there is a healthy competition amongst us, so let's not shy away from that. And it means that what we have to do is think about where we're competing and where we're not going to fight over $100,000 if we're going to be able to win $100 million to the state. And that's really important. We have to make those decisions, and that means communication. But we do have competition amongst us, and as Deborah said, sometimes that's around students, but it's also around other things, and we recognise that. Where we're actually working really well at the moment is in asset sharing. So we have fantastic asset sharing in this state with the supercomputing and CMCA and a whole other bunch of areas where we're working really well together on that. But when we know that the only option for us to really secure the space node, to exaggerate what we already have in the square kilometre array and amplify what we have in radio astronomy, which might also lend itself to the big data precinct that one of the universities has, or to the health data that the other university is working on, then we work together, because we know that that is what's going to put us in a really good position in competing with New South Wales or Queensland. And we're doing the same in defence. But of course there are things that we compete in and will continue to compete in, because that's really important for the state and the nation that we do so.
Ruth, I'd like to also mention what the Minister mentioned, Western Australian Health Translation Network. And that really does play to our distinctive strengths, but also brings us together as universities, but also brings together the health authorities, and it brings together medical research institutes and so on. That network is going to be our powerful way of getting funding from federal government, which is not easy for Western Australia. And then the platforms that we have there. So we have different institutions leading those platforms. So I think that is an approach that adds that extra value where, 1 plus 1 is not 2 any longer. It's much more than that. So we need to be competitive in the federal context as well, and global context, and I think the Western Australian Health Translation Network is an amazing example how that enables us to be that.
I might just sneak one more question in then before we go out to the group. But one of the areas, Stephen, you mentioned competing with New South Wales. Let's talk about Adelaide for a second, because Adelaide is small. It's equally far from Canberra, really. Yet it has an innovation precinct at Tonsley that's worth, $265 million from the state government's gone into it. It's got 2 universities in collaboration. It's got amazing ability to pull in international tourists. We're much better than Adelaide, I say as a West Australian. Why are we losing share to them?
Actually, South Australia is a good lesson to look at, not just in that, but in the international student market and all sorts of things. So you would look at a state that can't keep the lights on, and it's not exactly the most exciting city in the world, and yet it's now outperforming us in international students. It's doing well in its innovation hubs, etc. One of the things, you can put this down, and it's not a criticism, but it's just a fact, we've been outspent in many areas in terms of our investment in making Adelaide have a clear proposition in terms of for companies, but also for international students. They've been very good at that, and they put a lot of money in that. We've been outspent in terms of what might go into Study Perth for bringing international students by 5 to 10-fold by that state. And you can see the results if you look 10 or 12 years back. South Australia was well below us, and there's been a steady increase, and now they've just pipped ahead of us. That is astonishing, but it clearly demonstrates that they got their act together in terms of what the proposition was, and they put a lot of government money, a lot of state money behind it. So we need to do something similar, and we need to do it quickly because we need to catch up. We are falling behind, and it's really quite ridiculous.
I think more astonishing is even that Tasmania had 28% growth in international students in the past years, and we are going backwards. So what is it that Tasmania has that we don't have in Western Australia. And I think we have diagnosed the international student challenge many times now. We diagnosed it over and over again. We've been declining in international students since 2002. So it's nothing new. Steps have been taken. We're very grateful for those steps. But what we've been having conversations recently about is we really cannot afford to have an incremental approach anymore. We are looking for a step change, and what will that look like? And to me, it's partly about mindset. It is about funding, but it's also about mindset. International students don't actually take away jobs from Western Australians. The Deloitte Access Economics estimates that for every 10 international students, there's 2.9 jobs created in the economy. So I think we have the narrative not quite right, and it is part of the mindset issue. But also, if you think about how do international students add value to our campuses, but also the broader community. And the young people of Western Australia of today, their future is not Western Australia or Australia. It's global, even if they're situated here. So international students being here adds great value for the future generations of bringing that cultural diversity and connections and so on. This is all about mindset. How do you perceive international students? We can have welcome parties, we can pick up students from the airport, we can do all kinds of things. But I think it's more fundamental than that.
I'm going to go to Celia, and then I'll go to Don, and then I'll come out to questions. So if you have one, please let us know over there.
Are we still on the same question?
Well, what's your take? You've got the smallest of the universities on the stage, but you've also got one where it's very strongly defined by its relationship with the students and the staff. Tell me about where you think you can compete on that front.
Compete with other universities? Compete with...
Well, what is the draw that you have?
What is the draw that Notre Dame has?
God.
What was that?
God.
There is that. There's also the fact that we don't have Steve. Either end of the spectrum, yeah.
You have a very large number of international students that are associated through your networks. You have people that come and stay.
We have a lot of study abroad and exchange students who come over. We pulled out of the international market some years ago, and we're going back into that space. I think what we do have is that we started differently from all other universities. We started as a private institution, had no support from no financial support from any government. It was philanthropic support. It was hard. All our land has been purchased. All our buildings have been purchased by debt, but nothing from the state government. No land grants. So it creates a certain mindset. We were also created with the purpose of providing university education within a context of Catholic faith and values. So we have a clear and defined objects and purpose about what we are set up for. Because of our historical background and we were one of the original disruptors when people didn't even use the word disruptor, in the higher ed market. We were the first or second, depending on, I think Bond actually beat us, private university in the country. We were the first Catholic university in the country. Students had to pay full fees. So we have had to compete, and there's nothing wrong with competition. Competition actually helps us all to improve. We have had to compete on that basis and define ourselves and live up to why we were created. So it does create a mindset. It creates a very clear purpose. People who come in and don't buy into the focus on the students don't last, because if you don't come into the university with that background or with that ethos, you'll hate it. And we won't hate you because we don't hate people, but we'll be glad to see you go. So I think it's, whenever I get asked that question, what makes it different is, and I answer, it's the vibe. It's all of that, and we play to our strengths. And I actually think that's one thing that all the 5 unis in WA have have learnt to do, and I've seen it over the time. I think I'm the only natural-born West Aussie here. Oh, you were born in WA, yeah, but you defected to Brisbane for a while. But there has been all of them creating their own identities. Yes, we compete. Competition is good. Yes, we collaborate. Collaboration is great as well. But to stick to what your mission is, to stick to what it is, define yourself and do it.
Dawn.
Well, talking of missions, I'm just curious as to why Steve didn't seek the wisdom that when he went to Adelaide and the lights were off, there was a message in that for him. Perhaps they were closed to certain people, Steve. The WA has, in my view anyway, and I think in many people's views, the capacity to really maximise on its potential in the Indo-Pacific and ASEAN region, but we have to have stronger links than we've already got. And I think one of the things that's missing is an understanding that the education sector has the capacity to influence those communities and those links like few other industries. And working with Study Perth, and you've heard all of this already, we're working on how we can create that sort of brand marketing recruitment agenda that's more than the individual universities. But I really wanted to comment on your point, Ruth, about the jobs and how that was picked up actually by Ava. So we all know that there is that sort of perception out there, but in addition to the Deloitte report, the London Economics report shows that for every 3 international students, $1 million is generated into the economy, but what that equates to is 15 jobs. So, let's just really tackle this myth around jobs being taken away rather than jobs being generated. We think about two things I'd like to challenge in terms of dominant narratives. One is that international students have an impact, negative impact on jobs in the region and for the state. They don't. They actually contribute to the economy and to jobs. And the second, which we haven't touched on, but it is important, and I will say, is that research is a charitable donation by the government. It's not. It's a significant investment.
Can I just have one more thing on the international side? If you look at the QS top 100 student cities, then Perth comes out 39th. And Melbourne is 3rd, and I think Canberra's 22nd. And if you look at the main reason between why that rating happens, because we're seen to be expensive, as Melbourne is seen to be expensive, etc. It's in the survey of companies, industries, asking, do you value the students? And we do worse in the West than all of the other universities. So really, when someone's coming to survey an industry, they're not giving as forthright a support of the universities as they get elsewhere in Australia, and that's worrying.
Well, look, that's a good opportunity, I think, to turn around and ask for some questions from the floor. And in particular, I'll ask you to keep your questions relatively short, but I'm open to knowing what do you think the universities should be doing to keep that door open with industry as well?
Hey Ruth, sorry, my question is not on that particular one. Mine's on innovation hubs. So there's no doubt that MIT and Boston and Stanford and Silicon Valley are the leading examples of innovation hubs. I'm wondering, is there any thoughts or views on what is the competitive advantage that they bring? What are the elements of the secret sauce that has made them the hubs that they are? Do we think that elements of that secret sauce are replicable? And if so, how can we bring some of that good stuff to the great state of Western Australia?
So I can start from the hub, the first innovation hub, and you might say, well, why would it go to Joondalup? And then there's the data, and why would it go to Curtin? And we can explore that. And it is a critical mass thing. So we already had probably one of the world's leading research groups in cybersecurity in the world. Then the cooperative research grant, which was, or funding, which was on the order of 139 million, that was headquartered in Joondalup. And then, of course, there's the interaction with the WA police, and then there's the Oz cyber node was going to come. So there was so many things happening at once that created a concentration of expertise in that particular area that it was obvious to set up an innovation hub there. And that's why the government did it as the first place. So I think it's just a realization that you're getting to a real critical mass now which could ignite, And that's the place you should do it. And I'm sure Deb's got the same story for the data centre.
Yeah, I would just add to it, and it's a very good question. I think there's a tendency to think about these clusters of just all sorts of organisations and businesses co-locating around a university. We play to our distinctive strengths, and that's what Stephen's just talked about. Certainly at Curtin, you've got a cluster around Curtin University, the Data Sciences Hub, the Pawsey Supercomputer that we're all involved in, Tech Park. And what you do is, set yourself up in a way that industry is welcome, that there's ways in which that can be facilitated, that you've got the kind of collaborative spaces that do bring the researchers and industry, a bit like I was saying before, the PhD students together, because that's the big ideas that, that's where it's all occurring. So there's some of those ingredients. Then I think it is about, if you look at the MIT, well, I think in Australia the best example, and I think the most successful precinct is around Melbourne University. It's particularly around health sciences, the pharma industry with the health institute. So there's a particular flavour to it. So you have to, I think, understand what the hub is going to be broadly, and then work to attract relevant industry, relevant SMEs to that, and then set up the collaborative spaces. You've got to have lots of coffee shops to facilitate collaboration, but also the startups and the incubators, I think, are also attracted then.
So just on the Life Science Innovation Precinct, which we've just announced with MTP Connect, and of course we'll be working across all the universities. We've got the collaboration in health already through the Health Translation Network. Really, I think what I'd like to say about it in terms of secret ingredient, I think they're quite simple. First of all, I think we have to realise that just because we wish it so doesn't make it happen. And we really have to understand that that requires a huge amount of effort and a huge amount of commitment and a lot of compromise, and letting go of some of the old structures that get in the way in terms of just, because we're quite difficult to do work with. I'm sure people don't understand that. We're quite difficult to. We make it difficult for people to do work with us. We can do better in terms of the way in which we allow things to flow through the bureaucracy. And the same in other institutions and with government. So if we're really serious about it, we can't just talk about it. We have to enact it, and we have to make sure we're willing to let go of old patterns of thinking and old ways of behaving if that's going to happen. Just two things I would say: longevity and stability. Having a long-term vision and the stability of that vision is quite important, and that means it has to be quite high level and aspirational, even if you have a year-on-year rolling plan.
I'm going to flick to Ava, but I'm just going to ask you, we should keep these short because I want to get some more questions from the floor.
The secret ingredient that I have seen that has worked very well across the world is not just the co-location of elements and institutions and so on, but staff. So you actually have staff working in your partners, and you are entirely embedded in terms of your agendas through the staff. So I think that's a key ingredient, and that's something we should do more.
Fantastic. We got any others from the floor? Sorry, down this way. Yes.
Hello. Can I take you to international students as the topic? I'm based in Perth, but I work for a private education provider that's largely based in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, which are growth hubs. Our perception in terms of working with universities, and we have a campus in Sydney with Victoria University, Melbourne, with 2,000 international students on a growth track to 3,000 to 4,000. When we reach that, we'll be bigger than the international operations at least 3 universities in Western Australia. Taking you to Dawn's comment about universities being greenhouses rather than factories is great, but taking you to business, where business treats the customer, the student as the customer, and the customer as the focus, not an optional extra that you do something to, but you provide a service to attract them. So for Western Australia to grow international students, it's not a question of recruiting more students by spending more money, it's actually retaining them. And our perception is that one of our associates recruited 100 students to a university in West Australia, not UWA, but a university, 100 students from India in the last year. The feedback we're getting from the agents who sent those students is that when they arrive in Perth, there's no jobs, there's no part-time jobs to pay for your rent, and there's not much at the end of the road in terms of professional jobs, careers. So these students are going to end up going to Melbourne and Sydney to get professional careers and to migrate. So the big challenge for West Australia is retention of international students, and I wonder if any of you have comments as to what you think you can provide as individual universities or universities working together or with the state to provide the added value. As a private provider, we guarantee in every student at VU Sydney an internship. It's guaranteed. We even get contracted by University of Melbourne to run internships for their postgraduate computing people. So how do you think you can provide that value to attract and retain an international student? It's not easy, but I'd be interested in your comments.
I mean, I guess I'll just say quickly, and then Celia, I think, has got a comment. But I appreciate your comments. I would say, having analysed this in great depth, the issue is both, well, it's about attracting students to WA. Yes, we all understand the importance of retaining our international students, and I think our data certainly indicate that we retain the students. It's really more an attraction problem that I think we've got in the state, and there's lots that we need to do. I mean, you've heard a number of themes come up here already. The Minister talked about the graduate skilled occupation list. That is a step forward in terms of post-study employment outcomes. There's probably more that needs to be done on those kinds of settings. We've got new student accommodation in the city that will assist. I think all of us as universities are looking at work integrated learning and related changes to the curriculum to support international students. But quite frankly, I think the issue is in terms of attraction, and we need to be working, we are working collaboratively, we're working very collaboratively with Study Perth. We're looking forward to the state's international strategy being released, and we will be very supportive of that strategy.
Celia?
Yeah, I do actually have strong views in this area. Students aren't customers and students aren't clients, and I think nor are they, and international students shouldn't actually, our whole discussion of international students today might be one of the reasons why they're not coming, because we're focusing on their financial gain that the state gets, that each of our institutions get. So just as our domestic students, there's nothing wrong with customers or clients. I'm a customer, I'm a client. And customer service, good customer service is excellent. But being a student and somebody engaging in education, it's more than about purchasing something. It's more than just about, staying in a hotel. It is an experience, and it is something that a student has to put in to get out of. So we need to actually reframe the way, and I think we all do agree on this. All the initiatives that have been put in place are actually based on the fact that we understand that a student is more than just extra money, is more than a customer, is more a client, and our obligation, our responsibility is to provide them with an education, an educational experience. So in terms of accommodation, in terms of meeting and greeting, in terms of, we've set the path as to what we're going to do. We have to keep doing that. We have to market it better, absolutely, but we also have to reframe our discussion. Every time this topic comes up, it's, WA's falling backwards, it means, we're losing jobs. This is all true, and I know that this is an economic forum, but if that is what the message that's getting out there, let me go to WA because they need my money. Actually, let me go to WA because they're going to provide me with an educational experience.
I totally echo that. Students as customers doesn't fit very comfortably in our academic ethos. But that does not mean that we're not giving our students an incredible educational experience. And actually, that is what we can do as universities, because when they then go back to their own countries, they are our best ambassadors. And that is one of the strategies that we have and need to build on. Whether we call them customers or students or having an educational experience, it just has to be high quality, and that's what we provide.
I do agree with lots of what you said, and I do think that the job element is very important. In Edith Cowan College, which we work with Navitas on, we are putting in internships for international students coming in, and that's proving to be attractive. The government have moved somewhere on the visa and the skilled migration, and that's going to be helpful, but it is a major issue. It's part of the question we get asked from students, will I be guaranteed a job. And we've got to work harder on that. But I refute any idea that we're going out to marketing by saying, please come because we need some money. That's not the projection that WA is making out there.
Look, I think we've touched a nerve, and I suspect we could probably discuss this. I'm going to get one very, very quick question, and it's very quick answers, please.
Hi, Jenny Milne from the RAC. You've talked a lot today about collaboration. That theme's come through strong. So my question is, how do you balance the competition of the 5 universities with collaborating for the better of Western Australia?
There might be competition for who gets to answer this, but I might flick it down to Dawn to finish us up.
Yeah, so I think the comment I made earlier was, I'd reiterate that, which is that it is important that we have healthy competition in areas where we are overlapping. Now, of course, we're all very different universities, but there are boundaries around which we blur in terms of some of the things, including health, education, business, engineering. I think what it does in terms of the competition is it means that we go back and we look at how we can continue to improve the course offering, for example, when it's students, or how we can actually innovate the way it's delivered, or the way in which we, and this is an important point that Ava made, it's not just about what happens in the course, it's the whole experience. The work integrated learning, we're providing lots of internships, we need to do more of that. What it does is it pushes us back to the continuous improvement and sometimes the step changes that are needed in order to lift us above or leapfrog ahead of one of our competitors. So that does happen. We do that. I don't think there are any spies in the camp, but we occasionally find ourselves in the same space and we have conversations about that, particularly in the state, but of course internationally. I think we try to work in a way that is about bringing students and researchers to the whole state.
Can I just add to Dawn's point there, just in terms of balance. The 5 universities are not-for-profit organisations as well, and we have been set up to serve a social purpose, to serve a greater purpose beyond our own balance sheets. So when it comes to questions of collaboration and or competition, all of us, all 5 universities, will remember the fact, and that becomes a key part in deciding whether it's a good area to collaborate or whether, competition will achieve the great outcome as well.
So,
We're here
really
for a social purpose.
A really good example of that is the recent work that we all did together on Respect Now Always, and the statement around sexual harassment and what we were going to do on campus about that.
I think that's actually it's a fantastic point to finish on. It's a really very good example of where the universities have worked together. Can I just ask you all to thank the Vice-Chancellors for their time?